so much. Okay, so we are going to start with a little bit of a game. Let's play a game today. Would you rather have 300,000 or 30,000 website visits? I'm going to give you some context when it comes to 300K versus 30K. This is really all about what you would rather build. And would you rather build this if you have 2,000 website visits per month today, you've got a website to trial conversion of 3%, and you have a free trial to paying customer conversion rate of 1%? Would you rather build towards 300K or 30K? What if I said, okay, same numbers, except we're now going to change that free trial conversion rate to 60%? Which one would you pick? Now, you might say, well, in the previous example, we would be underwater in either scenario if our free trial to paid conversion rate was only 1%. But yes, I will take 300K, Alex. But in this particular scenario, you might say with a 60% trial conversion rate, 30K still gets us 500 customers. And it actually beats that the 1% conversion rate, even with 300,000 website visits. This is the power of free trial conversion rate and activation rates in general. But here's the thing. Acquiring customers isn't really what it used to be. In fact, acquisition has increased significantly over the last, 5 to 8 years. This is actually research done by Profitwell, and this was done in 2018. We can only imagine what the the cost to acquire customers is today. But from this research, we have found that the cost to acquire customers from paid alone has increased 60%. And when we look at CAC when it comes to B2B versus B2C companies, it's actually increased 70%. Here's the kicker, though. When it comes to paid acquisition in general, and also acquiring customers, there's actually a bit of a disconnect when it comes to what customers believe ultimately helps them find new tools and products and services versus what marketers believe. Giant disconnect. Most of us believe that, well, people find out about us through paid acquisition. And yes, that is partly true. But when you interview customers, turns out word of mouth is actually the #1 channel. Again, acquisition getting even harder, and also attributing acquisition also is increasingly more challenging. Put it simply, we're actually obsessed with acquisition. There's an obsession that we have, so much so that Profitwell also analyzed, I'm using a lot of Profitwell data today, but Profitwell also analyzed 1,000 blog posts in the SaaS space, and what they found was over 70% of articles were focused on acquisition, and very few were actually focused on activation, monetization, or retention. And we take it even further. If you improve acquisition by 1%, you only will get a 3% lift in growth. But if we look at other levers, we will see upwards of 12% to 6%, even 7% lift in growth just by moving the needle by 1% in monetization or retention in other areas. And then finally, if it wasn't enough to make you care as much as possible about activation, there are 2 to 3 times X more growth for companies that focus on monetization and retention, more so than acquisition. This is based off of that same slide that I just showed you. So some of you might be thinking, okay, I get it. Activation, yes, I'm paying attention, you've got me. But what is a good activation rate? There are actually tons of stats about this, but I'm just going to give you a range based off of some really well-known providers of data in the space. So 36% on average SaaS activation rate from Lenny Ratchetsky, but he also gave the number of 30% for the median. The median is the number that represents most SaaS companies in the space. OpenView actually breaks it down by ARR. So they make the argument that we can look at the aggregate, but we can also look at this by ARR. What does the typical activation rate look like? And what we see is less than 1 million of 14% on average activation rate. But you can also see it jumps up quite a bit to around the 30% range in the million plus mark. OpenView, so the 14% median activation rate for less than 1 million ARR. Microconf also has data on this, looking at indie SaaS companies, indie-funded, bootstrapped, and 15% was the average. So on average, to the median, we're looking at 15% to 30%. That's about the range that we, for the most part, want to be in. But here's the thing I want to make sure to communicate to you, is that when it comes to benchmarks, they are great if you are not within the range. If you're sitting at a 3% activation rate, you want to get to 15% as soon as you possibly can. But if you are in this range, I just want to impart to you today that these are floors and not ultimately ceilings. We can go so much further than just the 15%. You can actually get as high as 60% activation rate, sometimes even 70 to 80. Believe it or not, I have seen it. So what I'm going to do today is, I really want to ask you the question again. We're playing a little bit of a game here. How much pressure do you ultimately want to put on acquisition? Even though it's 70% plus more expensive, it's taken longer than ever, and it is far more competitive than it ever has been today. We're going to talk about how to make onboarding suck a whole lot less. Onboarding and activation, it's one of those processes that I was actually talking to another founder of UserFlow today, and he was saying, like the developers and engineering, they don't necessarily want to do this type of work. It takes a lot of effort. So how do we do this as simply and easily as possible? How do we make the onboarding process suck a whole lot less? That's exactly what we're going to break down today. So first, we are going to understand our jobs to be done. If you took the approach of let's just guess, let's just throw some stuff up there and guess, this is going to be the process that's going to help you give your activation experience a focus. So how many of you just in the audience have heard of jobs to be done? Awesome, okay. I'm not gonna spend a ton of time on this, but just because I feel like most people in the SaaS space know about jobs to be done today, but just in case, a job is defined as the progress a person wants to make with a product. When people buy your product, they are hoping to make progress in some area. So the question that you have to ask yourself if you want to make onboarding feel amazing, you have to ask, why are they ultimately hiring the product? What's the progress they want to make? I'm going to give some examples. So Loom, let's say one of the jobs to be done could be, as a customer, I want to share videos of my screen, of something that I'm recording. When it comes to, say, Zapier, one of the jobs to be done might be to automate an action in an app. Zoom, host a virtual meeting. You get the idea. Jobs to be done are simple, they're focused. They are things that people want to accomplish. But here's the other part to this. When it comes to our own product experiences, we work with a ton of SaaS companies, and we usually see one of two things. There's two wolves within any self-serve product. There's the wolf that's like, we're going to give customers no guidance. They're just going to wing it. They're going to figure it out because our product is amazing, and they're just going to get it. And then there's the wolf that says, we are going to force customers through a 30-step onboarding that they can't exit, and they're going to have to go through every single tiny little thing. And then we end up with, the Anakin Padme meme of they can exit this, right? No, they can't exit this. They have to go through every single step. There's one or two wolves. What we recommend to most companies do is to look for the balance. These paths forget the job. What is the job that customers want to achieve when they sign up for the very first time? What is the goal that they are trying to hit? And how does our product enable them to get there? So I just want you to imagine this scenario. You've probably heard of Loom or Zoom or Zapier. Imagine if Loom forced you through a full walkthrough of the video library before you ever recorded your first video. Imagine if Zapier gave you absolutely zero guidance on how to create a Zap whenever you first created your account. What if they didn't give you anything to do at all, and they were just like, you'll have fun, go for it? What if Zoom made you go through their entire configuration of your account before you ever hosted your first meeting? It sounds absolutely bonkers to do that, but we do these kinds of things to our customers all the time without even realizing it, mostly because, again, we've forgotten the goal. We've forgotten what they're here to achieve, what they're here to accomplish. So what I always recommend is strive for balance here. We have these two wolves inside of us. We're looking for the wolf in the middle that says, get them to their job as fast as possible. Anything else that we add into the onboarding or activation process is considered additive but not required. People should be able to accomplish their goal, of course, without being too distracted. The next thing I want to walk you through is pie. So pie is a concept that I actually learned from Ramley John. There is an incredible book called Product-Led Onboarding, and he introduced me to the concept of pie, the Product Adoption Indicator. So pie is a KPI that we can leverage to understand what are the actions that users and customers take to get the most value out of a product, and what also indicates that they are actually sticking around and staying. Similar vibes to pie are the North Star metric. If you've ever used a value metric or an activation metric, pie also has really similar vibes. Technically, they are all different, but what I want to encourage here is that if you already have a value metric or an activation metric, your pie is probably really similar, if not the exact same. Oftentimes, we find that a North Star metric or an activation metric often ends up also implying what pie should be. But I'm going to show you what I mean by pie. What is that? So activation metrics, I gave the example earlier of Loom, Zoom, and Zapier. An activation metric for Loom might be when the user shares a Loom with someone else for the very first time. Another one for Zapier might be setting up your first Zap within 24 hours. Zoom could be completing a Zoom meeting within 7 days after sign up. These are examples of activation metrics, but you'll also find that it's really close to pie as well. In order for you to figure out what pie is or should be, though, we have to have a couple of tools, although you can go hard mode and do this manually. We need a product analytics platform like Amplitude or Mixpanel, or you can, of course, calculate manually, but it is not for the faint of heart. I do not recommend it unless you know generally what you're looking for. You also need to make sure that you understand the customer's jobs to be done. And then finally, intuition is actually really valuable here. Some hunches on where you might think customers ultimately get value whenever they sign up for your product. So what you're going to do is you are going to create a report that looks something like this. So when someone signs up for your product, within 24 hours, they take any other action. It could be anything. It could be literally any other action in the product. What does the curve look like new user retention-wise? So this is actually a chart that shows when someone signs up for the very first time, how many people do we retain in less than 24 hours? And then if they take any action after that first 24 hours, how many people do we then retain day one? And then so on again for day two, and then so on again for day three. And you end up with a curve that looks a lot like this. What this chart basically tells us is when people sign up for this particular product, we only retain about 5% of them after the first 24 hours. And that's when they take any action. That's bonkers. You basically lose 95% of people within the first 24 hours. I would ask you, what does your curve look like just baseline? But what we're going to do here is we are then going to take that baseline curve, and we're going to keep it, but we're then going to layer on some other high-value product events. So it's going to depend on your product, of course, but in this particular product, there were things like creating a watch list or creating a list or adding an integration. These were different types of events that people could take in the product. And we see a much better graph. We see much better retention overall. So our goal here is to figure out, okay, based off of what people are ultimately trying to accomplish and also what they're doing in the product, what does the better retention curve look like when someone signs up for the very first time? And this is how you define your pie. So a few North Star or pie options. That chart was indicative of connecting accounts, viewing a chart, and creating a watch list. These are specific product events and features in that particular product, but yours, of course, will reflect your features and your product. But just looking at that previous chart, I would say, okay, it seems like there is a job that people are trying to accomplish. These are the product events that prove that they're trying to accomplish that job. Now let's optimize onboarding for exactly that, getting them to those moments as fast as possible. Your mission, your homework, is to figure out what yours is. If you have Amplitude or Mixpanel and you've never pulled up that chart before, do it. It's really easy. You can do it in 2 seconds. You could probably do it even before I'm done with this talk. It's really, really fast at how quickly you can get that data. And if you don't, you can sign up. Mixpanel is a pretty cost-effective option. There's also Amplitude, which is one of my personal favorites. But I just want you to make sure that you know, what does your new user retention look like? And also, what are people doing to retain better? And let's get them to do that, which is exactly what we're going to talk about next. So now we're going to reduce the friction. Okay, so you probably have a pie. You probably have, you have hopefully a good sense of what people are trying to accomplish with the product. One of my really good friends, April Dunford, she gave an incredible talk last year at SaaStock Dublin about how to craft a story that sells. And one of the stories that she tells in her talk is she makes the argument that, we marketers and founders and sellers, we all feel like selling is hard, but she made the argument that actually buying is hard. Being a buyer is hard, and it kind of sucks. How hard is buying our product? I showed you some different ways to identify your job, but then also to identify what product events seem to retain more people. But now we have to actually look at our experiences and get a sense for how hard is it to buy our product. One of the most common examples of buying a product that is massively painful, everyone groans when they have to do this, is when they have to buy a project management solution. Why? Because there's thousands of them, and you get to a certain point in the business where everyone needs one. And the process that you go through is you do a bunch of research. You know the big ones already. You're going to sign up for those. You're going to dig through and find some maybe more niche ones. We're all mostly SaaS folks here. We're probably going to be using like a Notion or something to that effect. But when we go to their websites, they all look the same. They're all saying the same things. Then we got to sign up for all of those and then get all of their emails, and they all look the same, and they all say the same things. And then we got to, go to review sites, and those all have 1 million reviews, and they all say great, wonderful things. So finally, we go down to, all right, what are you using? Because I'm tired of looking. Just tell me, give me the answer, because I'm over it. But it's hard to buy. April's talk, she was right. It is really hard to buy. We feel like it's hard to sell. It's also really hard to buy. So what you need for this step is to map your onboarding and activation experience. How hard is it really to buy your product? My absolute favorite way to do this is more organic. I like to take screenshots. I like to make notes. I like to invite other collaborators and get their thoughts and opinions. What we're going to need is you're going to need a way to take screenshots and put them in a place. This could be Google Slides. This could be Miro or Mural. You need to document every single step it takes, and I mean every single step, every form fill, every click, everything you're asking your user to do, because you'd be surprised. Some of y'all have 30-step onboarding experiences, and you don't even know it because you've never mapped it. And then, if you really want to be fancy, you will also create a mock-up for what the fast, low-res, new world you're going to live in, new thing you're going to build. And Balsamiq is a great tool to use for this, especially if you're not a designer. You can just get things very quickly. So screenshots of every single step. We've got screenshots of every single screen. I even have a video walkthrough in this Miro board. This was actually, I think this had 20 different screens before I ever even got to the product. It was intense. Not only am I taking screenshots, but I'm also taking notes on what is pushing me forward and what is holding me back. And then at the bottom, I've got every single step, entering in my full name, entering in the email address, entering in password. Literally every single thing. You're going to take all of those steps, and you are going to put them into one place. And like I said, some of y'all have 30-step onboardings, 50-step onboardings, and you have no idea. And some of you are a little bit on the leaner side, maybe just 15. But again, the two wolves, right? But now we have to actually map this. When we see it all in one place, we can see, oh my gosh, this is what the experience is like. This is how hard it is to buy. If we really want to be fancy, we'll align the steps that we ask our customers or new users to take to the phases of their jobs to be done. So if you imagine, again, like a loom, maybe my jobs to be done is to record a video and share it with someone. There are steps I have to go through to accomplish that job. You can map your onboarding steps to the steps of that jobs to be done. And then we're going to determine together, what do we keep, what do we cut, what do we delay, meaning they don't have to do it right now, but maybe in the future. And then what steps do we add? Because we might be finding or observing that none of our steps actually help the customer get to their job. It's just a bunch of stuff for us, or things that we think that we need, but we really don't. Ultimate goal here is, what do you cut and what do you delay and add to get people to that North Star KPI, to get people to that pie as soon as humanly possible? We're talking, you don't have days, you actually have minutes. It needs to happen in minutes, especially if you are self-serve. This is what I tend to cut oftentimes across the board. So fields on the sign-up flow. Sometimes requiring a credit card up front. I know that's a spicy take. You don't always need to require a credit card up front, but there are some companies that, yes, it makes sense. But I find 9 times out of 10, it doesn't. Redirecting the user into an undesired flow path or surprise path that they're not expecting. Forced onboarding that doesn't actually align with the North Star KPI or the jobs to be done. Again, that wolf, that's 30 steps that you can't exit. And these are the most common steps I add. Just a very simple modal that highlights the top 3 things that you need to know to get value out of this product. Short, high-value product videos, like welcome videos when people first get into the product, really common tool. Collecting the top desires from new users. And then checklists are also incredible. I believe I just talked to the founder of UserFlow, and he mentioned that you can actually add checklists as part of your onboarding experience very easily, no code. So that was kind of cool. And then pop-up and chat messages, but only after periods of inactivity. Unprompted chat messages or pop-ups can tend to distract new users. I recommend only adding them after a certain amount of time of doing absolutely nothing. We find that this can be really helpful for people who might be stuck or lost, or just need a little bit of prompting and help along the way. And then finally, activation is not just onboarding and signing up. There's other activities as well, or opportunities to explore. Positioning messaging is one, the website experience, onboarding emails and assets, churn reduction activities, and then monetization and pricing. One last thing I'm going to say, and then I promise I'll let you guys go, but activation and retention. So a lot of us think about activation as this siloed thing that only exists in its own context, but actually activation also helps retention. If you find that you are suffering from a churn and or retention problem, you might actually find that improving activation will naturally impact your churn by keeping people around and who actually are excited to use the product and helping them get to their job as fast as possible. That's what people are there for. That's what they're here for. All right, so how to make your onboarding suck less? Know your customers' jobs to be done. Find your pie. If you have Amplitude or Mixpanel, open it up, see what's going on, see what's happening there, and also see what events could actually help improve your adoption rates. And then finally, reduce the friction for customers. There's a really strong chance you've got some steps in there that you really don't need, and also you're letting other steps go to help get customers to that job to be done as fast as humanly possible. Thank you so much. Cool. I'm assuming we do not have time for questions. No? Yeah, okay. Thank you guys so much.